The morning sun was already burning hot when Elena finished collecting the last of the desert sage from the hillside. Her leather pouch was heavy with medicinal plants, wild mint, desert willow bark, and the precious prickly pear pads that her grandmother had taught her to use for healing wounds. The year was 1886, and life on the Arizona frontier meant knowing how to survive with whatever nature provided. Elena wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. The small settlement where she lived was still 3 miles away, but she wasn't worried about the walk. She had made this journey dozens of times before, always careful to stay close to the river where the ground was softer and the plants grew thick. But today felt different. There was a stillness in the air that made her uneasy. Even the birds seemed quieter than usual. The Apache had been active in the area recently, and everyone in the settlement knew to be extra careful. Still, Elena needed these plants. Too many people were getting sick, and the nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away. She was picking her way carefully down a rocky slope when she heard it, a low, pained moan that seemed to come from behind a cluster of large boulders. Elena stopped, walking, and listened. There it was again, definitely human, definitely in distress. Every instinct told her to turn around and head straight home. This was Apache country, and a woman alone was an easy target. But the sound came again, weaker this time, and Elena found herself moving toward it instead of away. She crept around the largest boulder, her heart pounding so hard she was sure anyone nearby could hear it. What she saw made her gasp out loud. Man lay face down in the dirt, 3 wooden arrows sticking out of his back like deadly flowers. Blood had soaked through his buckskin shirt and pooled in the sand beneath him. His long black hair was matted with sweat and dust. He wasn't moving. Elena's first thought was that he was dead. Her second thought was that she should run. But then she saw his chest rise and fall with a shallow breath, and everything changed. She had seen plenty of injured men before. Her husband had been a soldier before he died, and she had helped patch up wounded men from skirmishes and accidents. But this was different. The arrows were Apache arrows, she could tell by the distinctive fletching. This man had been shot by Apache warriors, but looking at him more closely, something didn't add up. His clothes weren't the typical canvas and wool of a settler or soldier. His moccasins were beautifully crafted, decorated with intricate beadwork. His hair was long and braided in a style she had only seen on native men. And his skin, what she could see of it under the blood and dirt, had the deep tan of someone who spent his entire life under the desert sun. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a settler who had been attacked by Apaches. This was an Apache who had been attacked by other Apaches. Elena knew she should leave. Right now. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to pretend she had never seen him and get back to her settlement as fast as possible. If other Apaches found her here with this wounded man, they might think she was responsible for his injuries. Or worse, they might decide she was a threat that needed to be eliminated. But as she stood there, frozen with indecision, the man made another small sound of pain. Without really deciding to, Elena found herself kneeling beside him. She had to be careful with the arrows. Moving them wrong could make his injuries much worse or even kill him. She could see that one arrow had gone deep into his shoulder blade, another was embedded in his lower back, and the third had pierced his side just below his ribs. The man's breathing was getting more shallow. If she was going to do anything to help him, it had to be now. Elena opened her medicine pouch and pulled out a small clay bottle of water she always carried. She wet a piece of cloth torn from her skirt and began gently cleaning the blood from around the wounds. The man didn't move, but she could feel tension in his muscles that told her he was at least partially conscious. She had learned from her grandmother that certain desert plants could help stop bleeding and prevent infection. Elena crushed some of the prickly pear pads she had collected and made a thick paste. Very carefully she applied it around each arrow wound, being careful not to disturb the arrows themselves. The man's eyes opened suddenly, and Elena found herself staring into the deepest, darkest eyes she had ever seen. For a moment, neither of them moved. She could see intelligence there and pain, but also something else. A kind of dignity that seemed unshakable even in his current condition. He said something in Apache, too quietly for her to understand even if she had known. The language. Then his eyes closed again. Elena realized she was shaking. This was insane. She was a white woman alone in the desert trying to save the life of an Apache warrior. If anyone from her settlement found out, they would think she had lost her mind. If any Apache found them, they would probably kill them both. But looking down at this wounded man, Elena couldn't bring herself to leave. There was something about him that commanded respect, even lying there helpless and bleeding. She had the strange feeling that this was no ordinary warrior. She managed to tear more strips from her petticoat and wrap them around his torso, creating makeshift bandages that would hold the healing paste in place. The man was unconscious again, which was probably better. Moving him was going to hurt. Elena looked around and spotted what she was looking for, an old mining shack about a quarter-mile away. She had discovered it years ago during one of her plant-gathering trips. It was small and run down, but it would provide shelter and hiding. The problem was getting him there. He was a big man, probably close to 6 feet tall and strongly built. Elena was small, barely 5 feet 3 inches, and she certainly couldn't carry him. She tried shaking his shoulder gently. "Can you hear me? You need to help me get you somewhere safe." His eyes opened again, and this time he seemed more alert. He looked at her for a long moment, then at his own injuries, then back at her. She could see him trying to understand what was happening. Elena pointed toward the mining shack. "There," she said, speaking slowly and clearly. "We need to go there. Safe." The man followed her gaze, then nodded slightly. With enormous effort, he managed to get his hands under himself and push up to his knees. Elena could see the arrows shifting slightly with his movement, and she winced knowing how much it must hurt. Together, they made their way slowly toward the shack. The man leaned heavily on Elena's shoulder, and she could feel the heat of fever already starting to build in his body. Every few steps they had to stop so he could rest. By the time they reached the shack, both of them were exhausted. Elena helped him lie down on a pile of old canvas she found in one corner. The exertion had started his wounds bleeding again, and she quickly went to work reapplying the healing paste and tightening his bandages. As she worked, Elena found herself studying his face. Even unconscious and pale from blood loss, there was something commanding about his features. This was a man used to being in charge, she realized, the kind of man other men followed. The thought sent a chill through her. What if he wasn't just any Apache warrior? What if he was someone important, a war leader, a chief? Elena pushed the thought away. It didn't matter who he was. Right now he was just a badly injured man who needed help, and she was the only one who could provide it. She settled down beside him to keep watch. The sun was starting to set, painting the desert in shades of red and gold. In her settlement, people would be wondering where she was. But Elena couldn't leave now, not when the man's breathing was still so unsteady, not when infection could set in at any moment. She pulled a small piece of jerky from her pouch and chewed it slowly, trying to make it last. It was going to be a long night. As darkness fell over the desert, Elena listened to every sound. Coyotes howling in the distance, the scrabble of small animals moving through the brush, and underneath it all, the steady but labored breathing of the man she was trying to save. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if he would survive the night. She didn't know if other Apache would come looking for him. She didn't know if she would ever make it back to her settlement alive. But sitting there in the darkness, watching over this wounded stranger, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt needed. She felt useful. She felt like she was doing something that truly mattered. Whatever happened next, she had made her choice. She would stay with him until he was either healed or dead. Everything else would have to wait. Elena woke up with a start as the first rays of dawn crept through the cracks in the old shack walls. She had dozed off sometime during the night, her back against the rough wooden wall, and now her neck was stiff and sore. But that discomfort disappeared immediately when she looked at her patient. He was awake, those dark eyes watching her with an intensity that made her catch her breath. For a moment, neither of them moved. Elena could see that his fever had broken during the night. His skin no longer had that frightening, heated flush, but she could also see pain etched in every line of his face. "Water," she said softly, reaching for her small clay bottle. She helped him drink, being careful not to let him move too much. The arrows were still in his back, and she knew that removing them would be the most dangerous part of his treatment. After he had drunk his fill, the man closed his eyes again, but Elena could tell he was still conscious. She took the opportunity to examine his wounds more closely in the morning light. The good news was that none of the arrows seemed to have hit anything vital. The bad news was that they had to come out soon, or infection would set in and kill him just as surely as if they had pierced his heart. Elena had helped remove arrows before, but never anything like this. These were war arrows, designed to cause maximum damage. The points were sharp and barbed, meant to tear flesh when they were pulled out. And they had gone deep. She spent the morning preparing everything she would need. From her medicine pouch, she took out strips of clean cloth, her small knife, and several different healing plants. She also gathered some dry wood from around the shack and built a small fire to sterilize her knife. When everything was ready, Elena turned back to her patient. His eyes were open again, and she could see that he understood what was coming. "This is going to hurt," she said, even though she wasn't sure he understood English. "But if I don't do this, you'll die." The man nodded slightly. Then, to her surprise, he spoke. "Do it," he said in English, his voice rough but clear. Elena's hands froze. He spoke English. He had understood everything she had said since finding him. "You understand me," she said. He nodded again. "Some. Learned. From traders." This changed things. Elena had been operating on the assumption that they couldn't communicate, that she was just helping an injured animal in a way. But if he could understand her, if he could talk to her. "What's your name?" she asked. The man was quiet for a long moment. "Why do you help me?" It wasn't an answer to her question, but Elena understood why he was asking. "Because you needed help," she said simply. "I could be your enemy." "Are you my enemy?" Another long pause. "I don't know." Elena found this answer strangely honest, and it made her trust him a little more. "My name is Elena," she said. "I live in the settlement by the river." "I know this place," he said. A chill ran down Elena's spine. If he knew her settlement, what did that mean? Was he one of the warriors who had been raiding in the area? But she pushed those thoughts aside. Right now he was just a badly injured man who needed her help. "I need to remove the arrows now," she said. "It's going to be very painful." The man closed his eyes. "I am ready." Elena started with the arrow in his shoulder, the one that seemed to have gone in at the best angle. She heated her knife in the fire until it glowed red, then let it cool slightly. Working as carefully as she could, she began to cut away the tissue around the arrow shaft. The man made no sound, but she could feel his muscles tense with pain. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. The first arrow came out cleanly, thank God. Elena immediately pressed one of her healing poultices against the wound and bound it tightly with clean cloth. The second arrow was more difficult. It had gone in at an angle and was lodged against his shoulder blade. Elena had to work for nearly an hour, stopping frequently to let her patient rest. By the time she finally got it out, both of them were exhausted. The third arrow was the worst. It had gone deep into his side, and Elena was terrified that it might have nicked something important inside. She worked slowly and carefully, praying that she wouldn't cause more damage than she prevented. When it finally came free, Elena felt like collapsing with relief. She cleaned all 3 wounds as thoroughly as she could and applied fresh poultices, made from the antimicrobial plants her grandmother had taught her about. "It's done," she said, sitting back on her heels. The man opened his eyes. His face was pale and drawn with pain, but there was something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Respect. "You have strong hands," he said quietly. Over the next 2 days, Elena settled into a routine of caring for her patient. She changed his bandages twice a day, made sure he drank plenty of water, and shared what little food she had with him. She had been gone from her settlement for 3 days, now, and she knew people would be getting worried. But she couldn't leave him yet. He was still weak, and infection was still a real danger. On the third morning, she was rewashing his bandages when he spoke again. "Why are you not afraid of me?" Elena looked up from her work. "Should I be?" "Most of your people would be. Most of your people would probably be afraid of me too," Elena pointed out. This seemed to surprise him. He thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "This is true." "What happened to you?" Elena asked. "Who shot you?" The man was quiet for so long that Elena thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, "My own people." "Why?" "Some think I am too. How do you say? Soft. That I want peace too much." Elena felt a stir of hope. "Do you want peace?" "War has taken too much from everyone," he said simply. As the days passed, Elena found herself talking more and more with her patient. His English was better than he had first let on, and he seemed eager to practice it. In return, he began teaching her words in Apache. "Mountain," he would say, pointing toward the distant peaks visible through the shack's single window. "Zil," Elena would repeat, trying to get the pronunciation right. He would nod approvingly or shake his head and correct her until she got it right. They talked about many things during those long hours. He told her about life in the Apache camps, about hunting and the ceremonies that marked the changing seasons. She told him about her settlement, about her late husband, about the difficulty of making a life on the frontier. Elena learned that he had a wife and children, something that surprised her. Somehow she had pictured Apache warriors as solitary figures, not family men. But when he spoke of his children, his whole face softened. "My daughter is learning to make baskets," he said one afternoon. "She has small hands, good for the tight weaving." "How old is she?" 7 summers. Elena felt a pang of sadness. She and her husband had wanted children, but it had never happened for them. "She sounds wonderful." She asks many questions, always wanting to know why this, why that. He smiled, lightly. "Like someone else I know." Elena realized he was talking about her. It was true. She had been asking him question after question, eager to learn about his world. On the 4th day, Elena woke to find her patient sitting up, something he hadn't been strong enough to do before. "You're feeling better?" she observed. "Strong. Enough to travel soon," he said. Elena felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Relief because it meant he was going to survive. Disappointment because it meant their strange friendship was coming to an end. "Where will you go?" she asked. "Back to my people. There are things I must do. Even though they shot you, especially because they shot me." His expression was grim. "There are those who think only war can solve our problems. I must convince them otherwise." "That sounds dangerous." "Everything is dangerous now," he said. "But doing nothing is most dangerous of all." Elena spent that day gathering more medicinal plants and preparing traveling supplies for him. She made concentrated healing pastes that he could carry with him, and she found an old water skin in the shack that would hold more water than her small clay bottle. That evening, as they shared what might be their last meal together, Elena worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering her for days. "You never told me your name." The man looked at her for a long time. Finally, he said, "Names have power. Giving someone your name means trusting them with part of yourself." "I told you my name." "Yes. And I have not forgotten the trust that showed." "So?" He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "My name is Diego." Elena sensed that this wasn't his full name, or perhaps not even his real name. But it was what he was willing to share, and she respected that. "Thank you, Diego," she said, "for trusting me." They spent the evening talking quietly, both of them aware that this might be their last peaceful conversation. Elena found herself memorizing his face, the way the firelight played across his features, the sound of his voice when he laughed at something she said. When morning came, Diego was able to stand without help for the first time since she had found him. He moved carefully, favoring his healing wounds, but he was definitely strong enough to travel. Elena helped him gather his few possessions, his knife, which had been on his belt when she found him, and a small leather pouch that contained items she couldn't identify. "Thank you," he said, facing her as they stood outside the old shack. "You saved my life." "You would have done the same for me," Elena said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Elena couldn't stop thinking about Diego's warning as she walked back toward her settlement. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every sound made her jump. The desert that had always felt like her refuge now seemed full of danger. When she finally reached the outskirts of town. The sun was setting. She could see the warm glow of oil lamps in windows and smell wood smoke from cooking fires. Everything looked so normal, so peaceful. It was hard to believe that this quiet little community might soon be under attack. "Elena, thank God you're safe." She turned to see Mrs. Henderson, the blacksmith's wife, hurrying toward her. The older woman's face was creased with worry. "We've been looking for you for days," Mrs. Henderson said, reaching out to touch Elena's arm as if to make sure she was real. "When you didn't come back from gathering plants, we thought, well, we feared the worst." "I got turned around," Elena said, hating the lie but knowing she couldn't tell the truth. "Spent a couple days lost in the desert before I found my way back." Mrs. Henderson studied Elena's appearance, her torn and stained dress, her sunburned face, her exhausted expression. "You look like you've been through hell, dear. Come on, let's get you home and fed." Elena allowed herself to be led back to her small cabin at the edge of town. Mrs. Henderson bustled around, heating water for tea and fussing over Elena like a mother hen. But Elena barely heard the woman's concerned chatter. Her mind was still, back in that old mining shack, still thinking about Diego and his warning. Over the next few days, Elena tried to return to her normal routine. She tended her small garden, helped neighbors with their ailments, and went about her daily business. But she found herself constantly scanning the horizon, watching for signs of Apache warriors. She also found herself thinking about Diego more than she should. She remembered the way he had looked at her with such respect after she removed the arrows. She remembered his gentle patience when teaching her Apache words. She remembered the pain in his voice when he spoke about his daughter. Elena had never expected to feel friendship with an Apache warrior. She had certainly never expected to worry about one. A week after her return, Elena was working in her garden when she heard the thunder of approaching horses. She looked up to see a cavalry patrol riding hard toward the settlement, dust billowing behind them. The patrol's leader, Lieutenant Patterson, called all the residents together in the town square. His face was grim as he addressed the small crowd. "We've had reports of increased Apache activity in the area," he announced. "There may be plans for raids on frontier settlements. We're posting additional guards, and I want everyone to be extra vigilant." Elena felt her stomach tighten. Diego's warning was proving accurate. "What should we do if they attack?" asked Mr. Henderson, the blacksmith. "Stay indoors, keep your weapons ready, and wait for help," Patterson replied. "Don't try to. Be heroes. These Apache are skilled warriors, and they know this terrain better than we do." After the soldiers left to set up their guard posts, Elena overheard several of the townspeople talking. "I say we strike first," growled Tom Morrison, a rancher who had lost cattle to Apache raids. "Find their camp and wipe them out before they can attack us." "And how exactly would we do that?" asked Dr. Williams, the settlement's physician. "We're farmers and shopkeepers, not soldiers." "The Apache aren't monsters," Elena found herself saying. Everyone turned to look at her, and she immediately regretted speaking up. "What did you say?" Tom Morrison's voice was dangerously quiet. Elena felt her cheeks burn, but she couldn't take the words back now. "I just mean, they're people like us. They have families, children. Maybe there's a way to avoid fighting." "People like us?" Morrison stepped closer to Elena, his face flushed with anger. "Tell that to the Johnson family. Tell that to the Martinez children who watched their father get murdered by Apache devils." Elena wanted to point out that Apache had also watched their families be killed by white settlers, but she knew that would only make things worse. She mumbled an apology and hurried back to her cabin. That night, Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling. She kept thinking about what Diego had said about some of his people believing only war could solve their problems. It seemed like some of her people felt the same way. 3 days later, Elena was gathering herbs again, though she stayed much closer to town this time. She was careful to tell Mrs. Henderson exactly where she was going and when she would be back. She was kneeling beside a creek collecting willow bark when she heard a familiar voice. "You came back." Elena spun around to find Diego standing behind a cluster of cottonwood trees. He looked much better than when she had last seen him, stronger, healthier. But there was something in his expression that hadn't been there before, a kind of sadness that made Elena's heart ache. "Diego, what are you doing here? It's dangerous." "Dangerous for both of us," he agreed, stepping closer. "But I had to see you." "Why?" "Because things are getting worse. The young warriors are talking more about revenge. They want to attack your settlement within days." Elena felt the world tilt around her. "Can't you stop them?" Diego shook his head. "I tried. That's why my own people shot me. They think I've become soft, that I care more about peace than justice." "Maybe you do care more about peace," Elena said. "Maybe that's not a bad thing." "Tell that to the families of the dead," Diego replied bitterly. "Tell that to the children who have no fathers because of white soldiers." Elena heard the pain in his voice and realized that he was carrying the same burden she was, the weight of trying to bridge two worlds that seemed determined to destroy each other. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "for all of it, for the things my people have done, for the pain you've suffered." Diego looked at her with surprise. "You apologize for things you did not do?" "Someone should." They stood in silence for a moment, the creek gurgling softly between them. "There's something else," Diego said finally. "The reason I really came to find you." "What?" "Some of the warriors want to attack during the harvest celebration, when all the families will be gathered together in one place." Elena's blood went cold. The harvest celebration was in 2 days. Every person in the settlement would be there, including all the children. "You have to warn them," Diego continued. "Tell them to cancel the celebration, to keep everyone inside." "I can't," Elena said. "How would I explain knowing about the attack? They'd want to know where I got the information." "Then tell them you saw Apache scouts. Tell them anything." Elena shook her head. "They wouldn't believe me. And even if they did, some of them would want to organize a counterattack. More people would die." Diego's face was grim. "Then what do you suggest?" Elena thought frantically. There had to be another way, some solution that didn't involve more bloodshed. "What if you could convince your people to call off the attack?" she asked. "I told you they don't listen to me anymore." "But what if you had something to offer them? Something that would make peace more attractive than war?" Diego looked skeptical. "Like what?" Elena took a deep breath. What she was about to suggest was either brilliant or completely insane. "What if you could negotiate directly with our leaders? Not through the army, but with the people who actually live here? What if you could work out some kind of arrangement that would benefit both sides?" "Your people would never agree to that." "Some of them might. Dr. Williams is a reasonable man. So is Pastor Mitchell. If I could convince a few of the right people to meet with you." Diego was shaking his head. "Too dangerous for all of us." "More dangerous than war?" That stopped him. Diego studied Elena's face carefully. "You would do this? You would risk your life to arrange such a meeting?" "Yes," Elena said without hesitation. "Why?" It was a good question, and Elena wasn't sure. She knew the complete answer. "Because I've seen enough death," she said finally. "Because I think you're right that war has taken too much from everyone. Because—" She paused, struggling to put her feelings into words. "Because I think you're a good man who wants to do the right thing. And good men shouldn't have to choose between peace and survival." Diego stared at her for a long moment. Then, to Elena's surprise, he smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "You are either very wise or very foolish," he said. "Probably both. If I agreed to this, where would we meet?" "When?" Elena thought quickly. "There's an old mission church about 5 miles north of town. It's been abandoned for years, but it's still standing, tomorrow night after dark. And you think you can convince some of your leaders to come? I'll find a way. Diego nodded slowly. If this works, it could change everything. And if it doesn't work? Then we're all probably dead. Elena felt a chill, but she pushed it aside. Then we better make sure it works. Diego stepped closer to her. Elena, you should know. If this goes wrong, I can't protect you. My people won't listen to me about mercy for whites. I understand. And your people, if they find out you've been meeting with me, I understand. That too. Diego reached into his leather pouch and pulled out something small. He held it out to Elena. It was the wooden bird he had carved for her while he was recovering, the one she thought she had lost when she left the mining shack. You dropped this, he said. I wanted to return it. Elena spent the entire next day trying to figure out how to convince anyone to attend a secret meeting with an Apache warrior. Every person she considered approaching seemed like either a hopeless case or too risky to trust. Tom Morrison would probably shoot her on sight if she suggested meeting with Apache. Lieutenant Patterson would arrest her for communicating with the enemy. Even some of the more reasonable townspeople would think she had lost her mind. But as evening approached, Elena realized she had to try something. The harvest celebration was tomorrow, and if Diego was right, it would become a massacre unless someone did something to stop it. She decided to start with Dr. Williams. The settlement's physician was an educated man who had served in the army before becoming a doctor. He had seen enough of war to appreciate the value of peace. Elena found him in his office organizing medical supplies by lamplight. Dr. Williams? Could I speak with you privately? The gray-haired doctor looked up from his work. Of course, Elena. What's troubling you? You look like you haven't slept in days. Elena closed the door behind her and took a deep breath. I need to ask you to do something that's going to sound impossible. Dr. Williams set down the bottle he was holding and gave Elena his full attention. I'm listening. What if I told you there was a way to prevent the Apache attack that everyone's expecting? Would you be willing to take a risk to save lives? What kind of risk? Elena's mouth went dry. This was it. The moment that would either save everything or destroy it. I know an Apache warrior who wants to negotiate peace. He's willing to meet with some of our leaders tomorrow night to work out an arrangement that would prevent the attack. Dr. Williams stared at her for a long moment. Elena, how could you possibly know such a thing? Does it matter how I know? What matters is that it might work. It matters because I need to know if this information is reliable, Dr. Williams said firmly. If you're wrong, we could be walking into a trap. Elena realized she would have to tell him at least part of the truth. A week ago, when I was lost in the desert, I found a wounded Apache warrior. I helped him, and he warned me about the planned attack. Now he wants to try to prevent it. Dr. Williams' face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, concern, and something that might have been admiration. You helped a wounded Apache? He was dying. I couldn't just leave him. And now he wants to help us? He wants to prevent more bloodshed on both sides. Dr. Williams was quiet for several minutes thinking. Finally, he said, Where and when? The old mission church 5 miles north, tomorrow night after dark. That's very isolated. If this is a trap, it's not a trap, Elena said with more confidence than she felt. This man had the chance to kill me when I was alone and defenseless. Instead, he warned me about the attack. Dr. Williams nodded slowly. I'll need to bring at least one other person. Pastor Mitchell, I think. He's level-headed and commands respect in the community. Elena felt a rush of relief. You'll do it? Against my better judgment, yes. But Elena, if this goes wrong, if people die because of this meeting, I know, Elena said quietly. It will be on my conscience forever. The next evening, Elena made her way to the old mission church as the sun was setting. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure it could be heard for miles. She had no idea if Dr. Williams and Pastor Mitchell would actually show up, or if Diego would be there, or if the whole thing was about to become a disaster that would get them all killed. The mission church sat on a small hill surrounded by scrub brush and rocky outcroppings. It had been built by Spanish missionaries decades earlier, but it had been abandoned when the Apache Wars made the area too dangerous for permanent settlement. The adobe walls were cracked and weathered, but the building was still structurally sound. Elena arrived first and settled down to wait inside the church. The interior was empty except for a few broken pews and some debris that had blown in over the years. Moonlight streamed through holes in the roof, creating patches of silver light on the dirt floor. After about 20 minutes, Elena heard the sound of horses approaching. Her heart leaped. Someone was coming. But was it friends or enemies? Doctor Williams and Pastor Mitchell appeared in the doorway, both looking nervous but determined. Pastor Mitchell was a thin man with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair. Dr. Williams carried his medical bag as if he expected someone to need patching up before the night was over. "Elena," Dr. Williams said quietly, "are you sure about this?" Before Elena could answer, a voice spoke from the shadows near the altar. "She is sure. The question is whether you are." All three white people spun around to see Diego step into the moonlight. Elena was struck by how different he looked from the wounded man she had nursed back to health. He stood tall and straight, moving with the fluid grace of a natural leader. His clothing was simple but well made, and he wore no war paint or intimidating decorations. He looked like what he was, a man who had come to talk, not fight. Pastor Mitchell made a small sound of surprise, but Dr. Williams stepped forward slightly, placing himself between Diego and Elena. "You're the Apache who warned Elena about the attack?" Dr. Williams asked. "I am," Diego replied in clear English. "Why should we believe anything you tell us?" "Because I am risking my life to be here," Diego said simply. "Just as you are." Pastor Mitchell found his voice. "What exactly are you proposing?" Diego looked at each of them in turn. "My people are angry because they have been pushed from their ancestral lands. Your people are angry because they fear for their lives and property. Both sides have legitimate grievances." "Go on," Dr. Williams said. "What if there was a way for both sides to get what they need? My people need land where they can hunt and raise their families. Your people need security and the right to farm and build their community. The government has tried to make treaties before," Pastor Mitchell pointed out. "They never last. Because the government makes promises it cannot keep," Diego replied. "And because they negotiate with people who don't live on this land, who don't understand what life here requires." Elena realized what Diego was suggesting. "You want to negotiate directly with the people who actually live here, not with officials in Washington." "Exactly. The people in this settlement, working with the Apache bands in this area, a local agreement that both sides can live with." Dr. Williams looked skeptical. What would such an agreement look like? Diego had clearly thought about this. "Your people continue to farm and develop the land near the river. My people continue to use the mountains and desert areas for hunting. We establish boundaries that both sides respect. We agree on procedures for handling disputes without violence. And in return, no attacks on your settlement. Protection from other Apache bands who might not agree to the treaty. Possibly even trade arrangements that would benefit both communities." Pastor Mitchell shook his head. "It sounds reasonable, in theory, but how could we enforce such an agreement? What's to stop either side from breaking it?" "The same thing that stops most people from breaking their word," Diego replied. "Self-interest. Both sides have more to gain from peace than from war." Elena could see that Dr. Williams was beginning to take the idea seriously. "What about the army? They're not going to just let us negotiate our own treaty with Apache bands." "The army wants peace too," Diego pointed out. "If they can report that the Apache problem in this area has been resolved without military action, why would they object?" "Because it would set a precedent," Pastor Mitchell said. "Other communities might expect the same treatment. And would that be such a bad thing?" The four of them talked for over an hour, working through the practical details of what such an arrangement might look like. Elena was amazed by how reasonable it all sounded when people actually listened to each other, instead of just preparing for war. But then Diego delivered the news that changed everything. "There is something you should know," he said, his expression becoming more serious. Something about who I am. Elena felt a chill. She had always sensed that Diego was more than just an ordinary warrior, but she had never pressed him for details. My full name is Diego Naiche, he continued. I am the son of Cochise and the current war chief of the Chiricahua Apache. The silence in the old church was deafening. Elena felt like the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. She had been nursing the most wanted Apache leader in the territory. The man the army had been hunting for months. The man whose capture or death would be worth a fortune in reward money. Dr. Williams recovered first. You're Naiche? The Naiche? I am. Pastor Mitchell's face had gone pale. Dear God, if the army finds out we're meeting with you, then you understand why this negotiation is so important, Diego Naiche said calmly. I could have stayed, hidden, could have led the attack on your settlement as my young warriors wanted. Instead, I am here trying to find a peaceful solution. Elena's mind was reeling. All those hours she had spent caring for him, talking with him, teaching him English words while he taught her Apache ones. She had been befriending the most feared Apache war chief in the Southwest. But even as the shock hit her, Elena realized that it didn't change anything fundamental. The man she had known as Diego was still the same man. The meeting in the old mission church lasted until nearly dawn. By the time the four unlikely negotiators parted ways, they had the framework of an agreement that could change everything, if they could make it work. Elena rode back to the settlement, in the pre-dawn darkness, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. Naiche had agreed to try to convince his warriors to postpone the attack for 1 week, while negotiations continued. Dr. Williams and Pastor Mitchell would work on getting support from key members of the community, and Elena would serve as the go-between, carrying messages and arranging future meetings. It was a fragile plan, dependent on dozens of things going right and nothing going catastrophically wrong. Elena tried not to think about how many ways it could all fall apart. The harvest celebration was scheduled to begin at noon. By the time Elena reached her cabin, people were already setting up tables and decorations in the town square. Children ran between the adults, excited about the festivities. Women carried pots of food and jugs of cider. Men arranged bales of hay for seating and tuned their fiddles for dancing. Elena watched from her window, knowing that if Naiche couldn't control his young warriors, all of this joy and celebration could turn into horror within hours. Around mid-morning, Mrs. Henderson knocked on Elena's door. Are you feeling all right, dear? You look pale. Elena forced a smile. Just tired. I didn't sleep well last night. Well, you should come to the celebration anyway. Fresh air and good company will do you wonders. Elena knew she had to attend. If she stayed home, people would ask questions. And besides, if the attack did come, she might be able to help somehow. The celebration was in full swing by early afternoon. The entire population of the settlement was gathered in the square, maybe 60 people total, including children. There was music and dancing, games for the children, and plenty of food to go. Around, Elena tried to participate, but she found herself constantly scanning the horizon for signs of Apache warriors. Every shadow in the distance made her heart race. Every unusual sound made her wonder if it was the signal for attack. Dr. Williams and Pastor Mitchell were also at the celebration, and Elena could see that they were just as nervous as she was. The three of them kept making eye contact across the square, sharing their anxiety without words. As the afternoon wore on, Elena began to hope that maybe Naiche had been successful. Maybe his warriors had listened to reason. Maybe the celebration would end peacefully and they could continue working on their agreement. Then, around 4 o'clock, young Tommy Henderson came running into the square, his face flushed with excitement and fear. "Apache!" he shouted. "I saw Apache warriors on the ridge." The celebration stopped as if someone had fired a gun. Conversations died mid-sentence. The fiddle music trailed off into silence. Children moved closer to their parents. Elena's blood went cold. Despite everything, the attack was coming after all. Lieutenant Patterson, who had been enjoying a plate of Mrs. Morrison's apple pie, immediately took charge. "Everyone into the buildings," he ordered. "Men, get your weapons. Women and children, get to the store. It has the thickest walls. Elena watched in horror as the peaceful celebration transformed into chaos. People ran in all directions, grabbing children and precious possessions. The carefully arranged tables were overturned as people rushed for cover. But as Elena looked toward the ridge where Tommy had seen the Apache warriors, she realized something was wrong. If this was the attack Nietzsche had warned her about, where were the war cries? Where were the arrows and gunfire? Where was the violence? Instead, she could see figures on horseback approaching slowly, deliberately. They weren't charging into battle. They were approaching under what looked like a flag of truce. Elena's heart leaped. This wasn't the attack. This was Nietzsche, coming to the settlement to continue the negotiations in person. She ran toward Dr. Williams, who was helping organize the defense. "Doctor, wait," she called. "This isn't an attack." Dr. Williams looked at her as if she had lost her mind. "Elena, get to safety. This is no time for— Look at them." Elena pointed toward the approaching riders. "They're not attacking. They're carrying a white flag." Dr. Williams squinted toward the ridge. Elena was right. The lead rider was carrying what appeared to be a piece of white cloth on a long stick. Lieutenant Patterson had also noticed the flag. He stood in the middle of the square, his rifle ready, but not raised. "What the hell are they up to?" he muttered. The Apache riders approached to within 100 yards of the settlement and then stopped. Elena counted 8 warriors, all mounted on beautiful horses and armed but not in fighting positions. The lead rider urged his horse forward a few more steps, then called out in clear English that carried across the square. "I am Nietzsche of the Chiricahua Apache. I come under a flag of truce to speak with your leaders." Elena heard gasps from the townspeople. Everyone knew the name Nietzsche. He was legendary, the son of the great Cochise, the man who had eluded the U.S. Army for years, the warrior whose capture was worth more money than most people would see in a lifetime. And he was sitting on a horse just a stone's throw away, asking to talk. Lieutenant Patterson looked like he couldn't decide whether to surrender or start shooting. His hands shook slightly as he gripped his rifle. "This could be a trap," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Pastor Mitchell stepped forward. Elena held her breath, wondering if he would stick to their plan, or if the reality of facing the notorious Apache war chief would be too much. "What do you want to discuss?" Pastor Mitchell called out. "Peace," Nietzsche replied simply. "I want to discuss peace." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. He was doing it. He was actually putting himself at enormous risk to try to make their desperate plan work. Lieutenant Patterson looked around at the townspeople, clearly unsure what to do. This wasn't covered in any army manual. Apache war chiefs didn't usually ride up to settlements asking to negotiate. "He could have 100 warriors hidden in those rocks," Tom Morrison said loudly. "This is obviously a trick." But Dr. Williams stepped forward to stand beside Pastor Mitchell. "If he wanted to attack us, he wouldn't need tricks," the doctor said. 8 warriors could have killed half of us before we even knew they were there." Elena watched the faces of her neighbors, saw them wrestling with fear and suspicion and a desperate hope that maybe, somehow, this could be the beginning of the end of their nightmare. Mrs. Henderson, the blacksmith's wife who had been so worried, when Elena went missing, surprised everyone by speaking up. "My husband died in an Apache raid 3 years ago," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I have every reason to hate all Apache, but I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of watching children grow up thinking war is normal. If there's a chance for peace, shouldn't we at least listen?" Elena felt a surge of gratitude toward the older woman. Mrs. Henderson's words carried weight because everyone knew her loss, knew she wasn't speaking from ignorance or naivety. Lieutenant Patterson looked around the square again, clearly realizing that the townspeople were not united behind a military response. "This is highly irregular," he said. "So is living in constant fear," Pastor Mitchell replied. "What harm can it do to hear what he has to say?" Elena could see Nietzsche waiting patiently on his horse, not pushing, not demanding, just giving the people time to make their decision. She knew he understood that. Forcing the issue would destroy any chance of success. Finally, Lieutenant Patterson lowered his rifle. "All right," he said. "You can approach. But just you, and you leave your weapons with your men." Naiche nodded and said something in Apache to his warriors. They remained where they were as he urged his horse forward, removing his rifle from its saddle holder and handing it to one of his men as he rode past. Elena watched, fascinated, as the most feared Apache leader in the territory rode calmly into a settlement full of people who had every reason to want him dead. The courage it took was breathtaking. Naiche dismounted when he reached the edge of the square. Elena was struck again by his presence, the way he moved with quiet confidence, the dignity in his bearing even when surrounded by enemies. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me," he said, addressing the crowd but looking primarily at Pastor Mitchell and Dr. Williams. "What is it you want?" Lieutenant Patterson asked, still suspicious. "I want what you want," Naiche replied. "Safety for our families, the right to live in peace, an end to the killing." "Then surrender," Patterson said bluntly. "Turn yourself into the army and order your warriors to report to the reservation." Naiche shook his head. "Surrender has not brought peace to any Apache band. The reservations are places where our people die slowly instead of quickly." "Then what are you proposing?" Dr. Williams asked, stepping into his role as negotiator. What followed was the most extraordinary hour Elena had ever witnessed. In the middle of the settlement square, surrounded by nervous townspeople and skeptical soldiers, Naiche laid out the framework of the agreement they had discussed the night before. He spoke about boundaries and mutual respect, about trade relationships, and shared responsibility for keeping the peace. He talked about his own children and his hopes for their future. He acknowledged the grief and anger on both sides while insisting that more violence would only create more grief and anger.